Hey there, dear listeners. Here's a sample version of our Twitter space from last week. This is a live event, so the audio isn't up to usual podcast standards, apologies, but we did clean it up as much as possible. The full version is up early for patrons, so if you'd like to access that now and support the show, please consider subscribing via patreon.com/nicemangoes. You get early releases and bonus content too.
So, I presume most of the people who are listening live right now know what the so-called intellectual dark web is. But for people who want kind of a general overview, but like if they're newer to following politics or they're younger, maybe we should start there. So the intellectual dark web as a term, I guess it was invented by Eric Weinstein, right?
Yeah, and he very quickly distanced himself from it, saying it was always meant to be a little bit of a joke. But I think he only said that after everyone made so much fun of it, and the memes were endless, and yeah, it was great fun. But then Eric was like, "What? I always intended it to be kind of tongue-in-cheek." No, dude, you were pretty serious in the beginning.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It kind of just mostly was hovering on the margin. Somebody made a website of it, which unfortunately no longer exists. What a tragedy.
So originally, the intellectual dark web was a term coined by Eric Weinstein, and then he, distanced himself from it. And then, he didn't immediately distance himself from it, but he, as we just said, he kind of said it was tongue-in-cheek, kind of a joke, but they were pretty serious. We all know. But then in May of 2018, so I guess we're like right around the 6-year anniversary mark of their debut in the New York Times, they had this like big puff piece titled "Meet the Renegades of the Intellectual Dark Web." And she picked, some of her favorite characters from this, what she very wisely called a sleek website. But, I don't think it was a sleek website. It was basically just a list of these weirdos that were just posted on the internet by someone. But, yeah, so she's like, based on this sleek website, here are these amazing characters. And she introduced them with these 3 defining features right in the beginning of the article, and here's what they were. Men and women are different. Then the other defining characteristic was free speech. They all believe that free speech is under siege. And then the third one was that identity politics is a toxic ideology that is tearing American society apart. And, if you even knew these people at that time, you know what a sham that is, because they were always very selectively pro-free speech. They did not care if someone that they didn't like was being silenced. But what their free speech advocacy centered around was usually someone having consequences, even the most minor consequences for, say, a racial slur or being awful to some minority or another. And as far as identity politics goes, Dave Rubin's entire career was based on identity politics. When he started, all his YouTube videos, began with him, talking about how he definitely is not right-wing and how he's a disgruntled leftist because he is a gay married man and he likes pot or something like that. But he would always make sure to mention that he's a gay married man as a part of showing why he's on the left and not actually a right-wing hack.
Yeah, which is really you can't get any more identity politics, quote unquote.
Right. And then, Sam Harris too, right? He does this whole thing of using his Jewish identity as a way to minimize extremely dangerous far-right anti-Semitism. So he's like, I'm Jewish. And even I say that anti-Semitism is not really a big deal, even in the aftermath of a synagogue shooting. Or he'll be like, I can say this, I'm Jewish. The Jews, in part, brought the Holocaust on themselves. I mean, just like horrendous, horrendous stuff.
I have written that the Jews are in part responsible for the Holocaust. How tribal is that? Now, that's part of my denigration of belief of faith-based religion. It's like if the Jews defining themselves as Jews for 2,000 years, insisting upon living insular lives among communities that believe antithetical things about God, and thinking that it's important to marry within their community because of the profundity of their religious beliefs and their unique covenant with God. All of that divisive bullshit is part of the backdrop that gave us the centuries of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. So yeah, I'm someone who has made Judaism itself somewhat culpable in giving us the Holocaust. Now what am I, a neo-Nazi? What's my tribe?
And then he also uses, nowadays we're seeing his Jewish identity to be like, everything the left says about Israel is anti-Semitic. Every criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. The IDF is the most moral army in the world, and if you don't agree with how morally they're bombing children, then you're anti-Semitic.
The other thing that Harris did is basically never talk about the Christian right. For somebody who is of Jewish ancestry and also a supposedly militant atheist, this guy has nothing to say about the Christian right. And you published a piece, which we'll put in the link. And I'm sorry, we got a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to put out into the space here in a second here. But
and if you're listening on the podcast, I will add the links to the show notes too. So.
Yeah. And for 2 years after the January 6th insurrection, Sam Harris did 2 mentions of Christian right, or just the word Christian, which is incredible, considering that, like, the people who were there, they literally did a Jericho march where they were simulating the attacking Congress in the name of God. That's literally what they did the day before. And
yeah, he did not mention
pictures of Jesus to the insurrection. A lot and crosses. But yeah, Sam Harris had nothing to say about any of that stuff, which is really incredible.
No, in fact, he blamed it on the woke mayor of Washington, D.C.
So ironically, it could be a fairly woke mayor's resistance to heavy-handed policing that left the Capitol undefended.
Yeah, which is hilarious because she had no authority. Donald Trump had that authority. And everybody knows that. People who defend Trump on the internet, they will say that, he didn't, that was Nancy Pelosi had that authority. But in reality, in Congress, everybody knows that it is the president who is the commander of the National Guard. And you can literally see that on the DC National Guard website. This is not somebody making that up. This is the actual facts. So the first link that I'm going to drop into the space here is the original website that was created that was called Intellectual Dark Web.
That Barry Weiss said was very sleek.
And you can check that out there. So there's a bunch of people that are listed in there. And some of them are, I think, maybe not as they're not as well known as some of the proponents, I think. And so it's worth looking in there, including Tim Ferriss, who I think most people have no idea who that is anymore. Or maybe do they never? I'm not sure. And then Stephen Hicks and James Damore, and Lindsay Shepard. These are all people who, they're not talked about nowadays too much. So
yeah, but once upon a time, James Damore was like the hero of that IDW podcast circuit, and he renamed his Twitter account. What did he call himself? Fired for Truth. He was the Google engineer that was fired because he decided to send some ridiculous memo, I think, company-wide.
Sexist memo saying that there are not as many women in technology because, they're just dumber. That was basically the thesis of his memo. So it's a fun little trip down memory lane if anybody wants to check it out.
But also before we move on, I just wanted to go back to that identity politics point and talk about how much of their content centered on identity politics and finding these tokenized people that they could push forward to push their right-wing agenda, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali being one of their favorite so-called feminist secularist heroes, right? A woman of Somali background, an immigrant, but she basically talks like a white nationalist, and so they love that. And they were like, well, why can't the left respect her? She's a minority. She's an immigrant. It's like, this is not how it works, man. It doesn't matter, like, what background you're from, but if you're spouting unhinged things, people on the left will not respect you just because you're, say, a black woman that is an immigrant from Somalia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
your talking points, yeah.
Yeah, it's just that caricatured version of identity politics that they accuse the left of having. Like, they're like, oh, they will only listen to people if they are a certain degree of oppressed. That's not true. White men can't talk anymore. That's also not true. But they are the ones that employ this use of this ridiculous, yes.
And mascots, basically.
Yeah. I mean, you have Blair White, who is the trans right-wing favorite, right? Like, Ruben used to have her on all the time. All his videos were titled, like, trans woman, blah, blah, like, hates on trans people. Obviously not that direct, but something to that effect. Black man says racism doesn't exist, or something like that.
Yep. And of course they do that with Caitlyn Jenner as well. So I did also in the space shared the link to the Barry Weiss article if anybody wants to go down memory lane with that as well. But one of the things that was also notable both in the article and the original IDW website is that they were at great pains to portray themselves as not ideologically conformist, like not all on the right. And in the Weiss article, she dances around the fact that everybody on here has in the IDW had right-wing opinions, but she has one fig leaf in there, and that is Ben Shapiro, who she says he was criticized for not liking Donald Trump in 2016. Which it was true that the far right did hate him for that.
Yeah.
But she also deliberately, the thing that I am always a little bit unsure of is how much of it is stupidity and how much of it is malicious lying. It's impossible to know, I think, with these guys. But in her case, she did not mention that Ben Shapiro, he hated Donald Trump because he thought Donald Trump was a liberal. That's why the Never Trump movement got started. And I know because I was working in Republican politics at that time. Well, that was my last hurrah in Republican politics because I was had gotten to the point where I was like, the Republican Party hates its own voters, doesn't give a shit about them, and hates everybody else in the country. It only wants to have welfare for billionaires. So if Trump is a liberal, then hey, that would be nice. That was my attitude. And but like Shapiro hated Trump because he thought Trump was a rhino. I mean, this is a guy who says anything, right? If he thinks it'll help him. So at various points in time, he had criticized Pat Buchanan for being racist and pro-Hitler. He had supported abortion rights. He had opposed the Iraq War, not at the beginning, but eventually he came out against it. So there was some basis to believe that he was a little bit further to the left, at least verbally, right? Of course, that's not how he governed. But that's why Shapiro hated Trump, because he thought he was a liberal. So the very thing that she thought was an exception, or tried to mark as an exception, was not an exception at all. It was not true in any way, shape, or form. So
there are also some other really funny sentences in that original IDW article where she talks about how these figures have been purged from institutions that have become increasingly hostile to unorthodox thought. And if you think about it, what unorthodox thought? They're just echoing everything that is well accepted in the status quo. I mean, they're against anti-racism. That's fighting the status quo, right? what has been accepted for decades and decades and decades in American society. It's like this base level of racism. To just want to go back to that, it's not unorthodox. That is orthodox.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And and actually there's another line that I thought was funny. Because she also says they all share three distinct qualities. First, to what you just said, that they are all willing to disagree ferociously, but talk civilly about nearly every meaningful subject: religion, abortion, immigration, and the nature of consciousness. Which that was not true even in the beginning. Like these. It
was all wrong from the moment that article came out. It's like they barely ever disagreed. Yeah, sure, they would always point to these things like, oh, look, Ben Shapiro is a religious conservative and I'm a non-religious. I won't say conservative. But do they spend any time debating abortion or anything like that? They didn't.